Good morning. My name is Joy Calico. I'm a musicologist, chair of the Department of Musicology here at UCLA, and delighted to see you here. Yesterday was such a great kickoff to the conference. Really interesting, provocative papers, great performances, film. Today that will be a hard act to follow, but I think we can do it, starting with this session. So session 3 is Jewishness and Opera, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Diana Matut to you. By now, I feel like we are familiar with her and her work, but I am going to hit some highlights. She teaches Old Yiddish and Jewish music at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, and she is director of the Old Synagogue House of Jewish Culture in Essen. She was the Joseph Kremen Memorial Fellow in East European Jewish Arts, Music, and Theater at YIVO in New York, and visiting fellow at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies 3 times. From 2019 to 2020, she was the convener of the Oxford Seminar in Advanced Jewish Studies and led a research group focusing on Jewish musical cultures in Europe 1500 to 1750. And despite all of that, today she's an expert in Yiddish opera of the 20th century. So her various musical projects with the cooperation with Yiddish Summer Weimar, among them the Young Kadya Choir, a German-Israeli project which becomes the focus of a documentary, a CD release, and as we now know, the performance and score project, the revitalization of the piece that we were able to experience last night. So I ask that you give a very warm welcome to Diana Matut, who will speak to us about Henech Kon, the Jewish sounds of Yiddish secularism. Thank you.
Hi. How long do I have? I'll never say that to a scholar. That's going to end in disaster. Okay. Okay, I'll keep that shorter. Okay, thank you. So, Shalom Aleichem, schönen guten Morgen. Ich hoffe, Sie hatten gerade gute Nacht und alles ist besser und ihr fühlt sich gut. Sehr schön zu sehen, so viele Teilnehmer. So, thank you for joining. It's really lovely to see so many faces this morning. I hope you've had a good night. And I apologize. I know that there are many, many Yiddishists in the room and people who have thought about Yiddish secularism and Yiddish land for a long time. So in German, we have a saying, carrying owls to Athens, meaning bringing something to a place where there is already plenty of said thing. So apologies if some things are simply, a repetition of things you do already know. Bear with me, please. And there are always your little phony devices to give you comfort in the meanwhile. So I'm, of course, not really an expert on 20th century opera. I really just came to this as a Yiddishist and as a musicologist, as an active musician, and all of that. So this is really my way to Henech Kon. And so let us get into this question of Yiddish secularism. And let's start with Schneidermans Die antifaschistische Tendenzen in der jiddischen Literatur. Kollegen und Freund, da redt ich a Bürger von einem Land Jiddisch. Ein Land an Kasermes, an Militär, ein Land, in welchem der einzige Waffen ist die Pen. Ihr werdet das Land nicht finden auf keiner Weltkarte. Die Grenzen von dem dortigen Land befinden sich bloß in die Regionen von Kulturleistungen und mühevoller künstlerischer Arbeit. Der Bürger von dem Land Jiddisch ist der Bürger von der Welt. Were you able to read along the English translations? Okay, brilliant. And famously, Melech Ravitch, whom you see here on the right-hand side with his wife and daughters, left is Yud Singer, wrote about Henech Kon in his famous Mein Lexicon, which came out in Montreal in 1947, maybe for the first time since all Jewish eternities. A complete structure of intellectual Jewish secularism was built consciously. We have built a secular school, a secular theater, a press, a literature, Jewish arts. And we also challenged ourselves in the field of secular Jewish music. And our Henech Kon was truly destined for this. High praise from Melech Ravitch. And here you see Yitzchok Leibush Peretz saying about or to Henech Kon, ob du wirst es nicht machen, wird es keiner nicht machen. So if you're not going to do it, nobody's going to do it. And what you see on the right-hand side is one of those really stunningly beautiful, amazing stage settings that, of course, we know like from this super, super avant-garde Yiddish kleynkunst and theater scenes of, the 10th, 20th, and 30s. And you see Peritz's Bei Nacht auf den alten Markt, so very, very famous piece, for which Kon wrote the music. So this is not by chance that I chose this image, but we have this, intense cooperation also between Peretz and Henech Kon. So I took a bit of a book of yesterday's lecture about the Nessness, and I thought that is a very, interesting thing to consider. And of course, we could ask ourselves, isn't the proclamation of a Jewish sound of Yiddish secularism something of an oxymoron? And should we think about it in terms of performing Yiddishness, maybe rather than Jewishness, which might be also an interesting point to ask. And we all know how important Yiddish, so language, was as a marker of identity negotiations, and internal differentiation in the great war of Jewish languages and Jewish identities that was raging since the 1890s, roughly speaking. And of course, we have to consider, if we consider this question, so many other questions like cultural hybridity, cultural nationalism and secular humanism, the concept of Judaism as a civilization, and so on and so forth. So just very, very quickly, again, for those who might not be well versed in Yiddish studies, for the others, apologies. Now is the Ols to Athens moment. So we have Yiddish land and the Yiddish nation, which of course is a process in those years, in those decades, a process of consciousness rising. And I don't know who of you reads German, but there is this fantastic, fantastic book by Efrat Gal-Ed. She wrote it, unfortunately, only in German, but it's fantastic. It's on Itzik Manger. It's called Niemandssprache. So should you read German, then I strongly encourage you to get that book, because it's not only focused on Itzik Manger, it's really opening this entire world of Yiddish secularism, Jewish secularism of the period. It's fantastic. So, and Efrat Gal-Ed said, the driving force behind this minority culture, the Jewish intelligentsia, sought an authentic cultural space beyond the realms of religion and state from its very beginnings. The new Yiddish literature, with its centers Warsaw, Vilnius, Kiev, Moscow, and New York, embodied this cultural sphere, which, whilst geographically fragmented, was united by language and ideology. To be discussed. And then we all know how important language, text, and culture became as a portable home. And of course, the institutionalization of the Yiddish nation and of Yiddish land as a concept also brought with it the establishment of structures. And those of you who didn't know, Yiddish was founded in 1925 in Berlin. So it wasn't founded, as we all might think, in Vilnius. So this is only where it became, or where it had its headquarters. And if you look at the programming that, 1925 was put forth, so the YIVO programming, we see the classical aspects of Yiddish, of nation building in general. So we see what the state, the nation languages, the nation states had done for their culture and languages, the collection of folk songs, the ethnographic, ethnological collections of stories, of folk tales, of anything to do with the folk, however you might, want to define this, was really something that the Yiddish land people tried to catch up with. So they modeled themselves and their programming very much on the major nation languages. And part of that was, for instance, also the inclusion of Old Yiddish, right, as, the former stratums of a language that was spoken. So really researching Yiddish going 1,000 years back. And so that was really very important as part of that, creating an archive of Yiddish language, Yiddish culture, and so on. So all of that was part of the Yiddish nation building. And of course, Itzik Gottesman has written brilliantly about that in his publication, Defining the Yiddish Nation. I mean, that's, also part of his argument. And It's already out since a few years. And very consciously, centering around YIVO and other places, we see the so-called festivals of secular culture. We see readings, concerts, conferences, and theater performances being declared major cultural festivals. And in 1937, we see the first transnational Yiddish Cultural Congress in Paris of all times and places. And Yosef Opatoshu then writes about this event saying, Ashkenaz has ceased to be a concept. It has become an ideal. It has become Yiddishland. In Yiddishland, the sun never sets. Yiddishland stands on a higher plane than the possessions of armies, borders, and passports. The concept is still new, but it can already be heard in the symphony of nations. It's a fantastic quote. Also, it comes from somebody who's very consciously making this shift, away from the old geographical, cultural boundaries or concepts of something like Ashkenaz, saying, that is not a thing anymore. That's, something we should leave behind, and we should really focus on Yiddishland. And by the way, this quote comes from Efrat Gal-Ed's book as well. That's also from Niemandssprache, in case you're wondering. And if you take a look at how the nation was defined in the 19th and early 20th century, with this really brutalist, saber-rattling map, then of course we understand just how different the Yiddish concept of a nation was. Just the complete Dernenterung, the complete approach to Yiddishland, the conceptualization, was so far removed from anything the classical nation states in their ideologies had to offer. The nation in the 19th, 20th century, and even until today, is very often defined as very exclusive, as hermetic. It's often considered genealogical and later even biological, as we know, unfortunately. And it is very clearly always defined through borders. And those borders are physical and mental. And the nation state always requires a hierarchy. And if you look at the Yiddish, and this is, of course, one of the really bad outcomes of this attitude. And if you look at the concept of Yiddishland and the Yiddish nation, we see a completely different, a more permeable concept of the nation, right? It has nothing to do with what we see in terms of borders, armies, and exclusiveness. So it's a concept that we can safely assume was scarcely understood at the time of its emergence. So Yiddishland was a very, very radically different concept. And into that concept taps Henech Kon, right? So this is something we must really understand. This is where I would place him, but I'm happy to discuss this with you anytime. And Itzik Manger gives a lecture in 1926 in Bucharest. And he says, so that's Manger now, right? So it gets a bit flowery in language, bear with me. And so Itzik Manger says, the atmosphere of our poetry is the world. It reflects the frosty white of the Russian snow, the rustling and the legend of the Polish forest, the black orgy of machinery in America's megacities, and the picturesque Romanian landscape. Did I make a mistake? No, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's it. And dust and coal and all of that, right? For Yiddish poetry, all the world's religions, with their diverse hues, facets, and guises, are not merely exotic curiosities, but atmospheres that have organically taken on a life of their own, an intimate intertwining and union, thus revealing the vast canvas upon which Yiddish or Jewish creative thought pulsates. Again, very, very Manger, but beautiful though. I mean, it's very, it's a very intuitive description. All right, okay. So if you look at Henech Kon, right? I mean, I'm still cataloging his oeuvre, and it's vast. I mean, it's just huge. I would, in essence, really need a 3 years, research grant to actually really get this together, because, whenever you think you've kind of gotten an overview, then the next thing comes along. So in essence, he wrote dozens of nigunim. He wrote new nigunim, and they are so traditional in language partly that, you could take them for Hasidic nigunim. So he came from a Hasidic family, so that was really a musical language he was deeply, deeply familiar with and very at ease with. So really, his nigunim are beautiful. As you know, he wrote several film scores. If we have time, we'll come back to that later, because we usually focus on the like Friedrich Kapzon and Dybbuk and so on. But what we keep forgetting, that he also collaborated in films like Border Street, which is one of the most important post-war movies made in 1948. So let's see if we can still get to that, because there he was not the main composer of the score, but he contributed. Then, of course, we have this huge oeuvre of his cabaret songs and instrumental musics. We have his vast oeuvre of art song, right? So he wrote the Yoshel Loks von Chelem, and then Neil has brought something like a beautiful edition of another art song with beautiful also art that accompanies these publications. It's fantastic. He has written these beautiful arrangements and accompaniments for Yiddish children's songs. So there are 2 double LPs out there, and they are among the most beautiful arrangements of Yiddish children's songs I've ever heard. You would never play that to a modern child, never ever. It would be unbearable. But for us, it's just a gem. I would love to see a performance just of those children's songs one day again on an art, as art songs on stage, because they are so just beautiful and accessible too. We have all these arrangements for folk songs, and then of course we have this vast oeuvre of stage music and opera. And again, please remember that includes a lot of writing for theater performances. Yeah, not only Yitzchok Leibush Peretz, but also others. Okay, so let's do a tiny delve into yesterday's performance, because I think I have a bit of new material to show you, or some, like a few things you might not have seen yet. I don't know. But let's begin maybe with a tiny dip into contextualization. I won't bore you with this because this is all very well known. But let's just take a tiny look at Goldfaden just for one moment, because as we all know, Goldfaden could not read or write music, right? You know that. He could not, he was this great producer of all these operetta after operetta after operetta, but he himself could not read or write music. So he produced Shulamis and Bar Kochba. And what he did was, as he describes it in his own words, one can say that I'm more compiled than composed. But I think that compiling can also be practiced as an art. And we see all the sources he drew upon in his time. And, whenever Josh and I have difficulty placing Kon and placing, what he did in Bassheve musically, I often think of the very eclectic way sometimes that, also Goldfaden puts his operettas together. So that might also be, just a line of thought we could, explore. And let's just very quickly realize that we already also have a female biblical heroine on stage with Goldfaden's Shulamis, right, which came out in 1881, was, still played at Henech Kon's time. And yesterday, and this is also kind of a little bridge, because we know that Josh involved Rozinkes with mandolin in Henech Kon's, in the new part of the opera Bassheve, as a quote, which of course everybody, in Kon's time also would have understood. So, because this is why the operetta became so famous, and it became the sentimental trope for the whole of Yiddish culture. We have one aria, let's just, listen to it like for 1 second, which is Shulamis in the Wilderness, sung by Frieda Zwiebel Goldstein. Just 1 second. And this was recorded Berlin 1910. I apologize for the quality of the recording. I have not the ability to clean that up. But of course, we know that Kon becoming Kon up to Bassheve also included all those years of kleynkunst work. Of course, with Chadgodje, with the Chadgadyo, with the puppet theater, with Ararat, all those various programs they put together. And I just wanted to show this because I call this a bit of the lost Kon, because I just kind of scanned pretty much every Ararat program. And if you look at one show alone, all of the arrows you see here, that's all Kon. So he wrote every single piece. And so, of course, Broderson also had other musical collaborators for the Ararat shows, but Kon featured prominently, and he was almost always director of music. But this is extremely difficult to reconstruct because we don't have the music. We have a few recordings here and there of a song and another song, so something pops up. But generally speaking, we can say that most of the Kon from the Ararat shows is lost. Okay, so we are reaching finally Bassheve. This is the title page. You just see it says Bassheve and then Opere von Henech Kon, beautifully illustrated, and then underneath it says Libretto M. Broderson. So, and of course, you see the artwork. It's just a little side note. I sometimes, if you do research, you sometimes fall into these little rabbit holes that bring you somewhere else. So this was one of my tiny rabbit holes, the beautiful artwork of the first title page, and you see that it was very similar for the Ararat logo. But I don't know if it was truly the same person. Never mind. Okay, so let's together fall down a little second rabbit hole. So this is the first title page of the first page of David und Bassheve, and you see this is the piano score that Josh had at his disposal. And up here you see a little dedication on the left upper corner. And it says, Far unsere, not my toys, Tayere Rus und Moshe Rudinov, Dimechabrim. So for our dear Ruth and Moses Rudinov from the authors. So this is where it gets interesting, because those were the two singers of the Warsaw performance of 1924. Now let's explore a tiny bit, and I hope this might be new to some of you. So this is it. This is the only image we have of the original performance. This is a photograph. And you see in the forefront the couple. They were married. So Ruth and Moshe were a married couple, both singers. We're going to delve into their biographies in a second. And you see that there was stage setting, right? So you see a kind of Torah scroll in the background with the tetragrammaton, Yotivave, printed on top, or whatever, painted on top, and then underneath you see the two in costumes. Yeah, and that comes from die ausgeklebene Schriften von Moshe Broderson. So this is from this publication. So next time we'll stage it, we'll know, or have a glimpse at least, what the original performance was like. And this is actually when they are singing Aviglied. This is the scene, it says underneath Aviglied. Yeah, so we know exactly which scene that is, when Bassheve sings for David and lulls him to sleep. Okay, so very, very quickly, because this is this is important because Kon continues to work with Ruth Leviash also after 1945. So they meet again in different places. And just very quickly, that she was a graduate of the Imperial Conservatory in Odessa and married Moshe Rudinov, who also was a graduate of the same class. And they left Russia. They've lived in Europe and Poland for a time. And then in 1925, they joined the first Palestine Opera Company. And the first Palestine Opera Company didn't last long, only until 1928. And we'll come back to that in a second when we talk about Moshe Rudinov. So this was our King David in the original production. And he was orphaned, and he was placed in the care of Gedalia Weinhaus, a local cantor. So this is where he got his formative training in the care of a Jewish cantor. He then went to the Odessa Conservatory of Music, and then both of them, Ruth and Moshe, were accepted by the Odessa Opera Company. And they then toured Poland and so on, and then again in 1925 went to Palestine to become members of the Palestine Opera Company, which faltered in like 3 years later, 1928, and then they went to America. Okay, and just this is again a rabbit hole within a rabbit hole. I'm going to return to Earth very soon. So just very quickly, so the first performance of the Palestine Opera Company was La Traviata in Hebrew. Of course, they modeled themselves after all national operas, wanting to perform opera in Hebrew, in the national language, which was then, of course, Hebrew. And the year before Ruth and Moshe joined them, there was a huge controversy, which in essence was also a bit neck-breaking for the company, because the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem protested the showing of A Lévis la Juif, because the Latin Patriarch said, so we can't present an opera in Jerusalem that shows a cardinal and a Christian who pretends to be a Jew. So that's not going to happen in Jerusalem. And so the opera was banned, and it was a huge, huge controversy. Never mind, rabbit hole finishes very soon, but it's very, very sweet that only recently the Rudinov family has gifted the recordings of their parents or respective grandparents, Moshe and Ruth, to a Dutch opera lover who now had put him online. And so what you see here, let's just quickly listen to our original cast of Pascheve, just for 1 second. We'll listen to Moshe Rudinov with Tatenu to begin with, and then we have Ruth at the end with a very, very short solo. Let's stop here and let's just quickly listen to Ruth for a second.
Darum bin ich mekane, jeder was unter, der was best von keiner Liebe nicht. Sie quälet uns Welt mit junge Kinder. Oh, die
Okay, so maybe just imagine, 1924, those were the two singers of David and Bathsheba. Okay. So, and also also a little rabbit hole for you maybe to also explore at one day. I'm sure you all know Paul Dessau, right? Worked with Brecht, so great, composer for the German Jewish theater. He actually wrote and dedicated something for the entire family of the Rudinovs, just as a little side information. So he dedicated it to Moshe, Rufina, that's Ruth, Jacob and Naomi, their children, Rudinov, in 1942. And that was 1 year after Moshe Rudinov performed at Temple Emmanuel for a big concert and performed Dessau as well. So just a little other rabbit hole. So then you all know the Schnur Choir. The Schnur Choir was also involved in the performance of David and Bathsheba in Warsaw. So they were the lay choir, huge lay choir, performing the choir parts that we've heard yesterday. So they were the people, you can actually see them here. Those were the people singing in the 1924 performance, more or less. Okay, and now there is a huge debate. So was it performed once? Was it performed several times, the opera? How successful was it? So let's listen to some of the remarks about that. And once, around 1925, Henech Kon, Moshe Broderson, and David Herman, the director of the Dibuk, Moshe Rudinov, the baritone, and Rochel, Leviash, his wife, the singer, conspired. And they didn't tell anybody for a long time that they were preparing nothing less than a Yiddish opera. And one fine evening, it actually happened at the Kaminsky Theater. And since we had only a few trained singers in Warsaw, the composer himself took on a role, and only then did we become aware of the fact that he had a strong, trained bass voice. The opera, didn't last for long. So that's one account of the opera. And then we have Yitzchak Vater in his Jiddische Musik in Polen zwischen beide Weltmelchumis. So about David and Bathsheba saying, the enormous project has called forth enthusiasm amongst the Jews of Warsaw. Every performance was transformed into a celebration of Jewish musical art. So whom to believe? Vater or Ravitch? That is the question. Okay, and this is why I was bringing this up again. So have a look at that. This is a performance at the New School for Social Research in New York on May 3rd, 1943. And we see this as an evening solely dedicated to the music of Henech Kon. And you see that Ruth was singing. And have a look at what she was singing as the first piece of her performance. That is Flieta Feudel. It's this beautiful aria we heard last. It's the last aria that Bathsheba sings on stage during the David and Bathsheba opera. So it's beautiful that they actually had one song of the opera being performed in New York during the war even. And so Henech Kon placed himself in the spectrum of Jewish composers in 1940 in his article Jiden in der Musik, and he wrote, "The light operetta is almost exclusively in Jewish hands. Oskar Strauss, Kalman, Leo Poor Abraham, Misha Polyansky, the two Hollanders, Ralph Bernatsky, Kurt Weill. More serious Yiddish opera music was written during the last years by Yosef Kaminska, the son of Esther Rochel Kaminska, music for Parizes by Nacht auf den Alten Mark, in the Warsaw performance by David Herman, the Wilna Truppe, Henech Kon, opera David und Bathsheba, so he places himself in that. The music for Kiddush Hashem, Der Goylem, and the Madam Sanatorium movie, Mir Kumen On. And so this is something lovely. So this is the, I want to show you this because this is the files of the Jiddische Artistenverein in Polen at the YIVO archives. And what you see here is Kon's, so Kon filled out the form to become a member of the Jiddische Artistenverein in Polen. And so what you see here, it's really, really sweet. So he was asked, so the sixth question was was für ein Fach hat ihr gelernt? So which subject did you study? And he answers Musik. Und dann von was lebt ihr heint? This could, so from, what are you living off, so, or from today? So this could be the beginning of a great Jewish joke, but it isn't. But he answers von Gesangsunterricht. So he was actually teaching voice, made a living as a voice trainer. And then, and this was something I was looking for a long period, because I checked the archives of the Royal Conservatory for Music in Berlin, and I couldn't find Henech Kon there. But here we see he answers the question where he studied with Königliche Hochschule in Berlin. Königliche Hochschule in Berlin. So we know that he studied at the Royal Conservatory. So it's beautiful that this is a riddle we could solve, and this is his admission form coming from the artist unions in Poland. And on the first occasion of his Yortzeit, Sholem Rav published an article about him with the title Henech Kon, an eigenartige Persönlichkeit. So Henech Kon, a strange person, quite a title for the first year of remembrance, but there we are. And so he writes, Das jiddische Theater, also gut wie die gore jiddische nigunim Musik in Polen, hat gore Sach genossen von Henech Konen. Wie schon bemerkt, ist Henech Kon gewinner Seele von dem jiddischen Theater in Polen, überhaupt in der Kleinkunst Theaterwesen. Aber als es gekommen zu Folgen in Amerika, hat sich herumgedreht wie auf einer fremden Welt. Nicht geguckt auf dem, was gore Sach von seinen Schaffungen, sondern da gesungen geworden, sei auf der Konzertbühne, sei auf der Radio, ist da im Ganzen an Iberiker gewesen. So this is something he said. Okay, and I think I need to come to I think I need to wrap this up pretty soon. But I just wanted to say there is much more in the YIVO archives. So there is his score, semi-score of Sambation, which was a Goldfaden operetta, but he kind of made a new show, weaving it together differently, writing music for interludes and so on. But his most successful, let's say, musical story after 1945 in New York was actually this one. It's a performance of the Maharam von Rothenburg. So it's a Yiddish play which by Leivik, so very famous Yiddish writer, and it really became like it had dozens and dozens of reviews. The sad story being that the music was not mentioned in a single one of those. So it's all about the actors and the main figures, and the music is not mentioned. But here we see Musik Henech Kon. So he wrote the score for that theater music, and here you see the English and the Yiddish program, direction by David Licht. And so yeah, this is really something we might want to end with, because I've got 40 minutes and I have overstayed my welcome. So just as a little, really just reminder, if you have time, go online and watch Border Street. Again, it's a must-see movie which shows like one street in Warsaw where neighbors become enemies, and it's the faith and but also comrades in arms. So it's a very multifaceted story. It's nothing that you can really wrap up in 1 second. It's the story of 5 families after the ghetto was installed, and what you'll see here, if you know the book and if you know Friedrich Kapzonim and so on, this is a very different facet of Kon, because here we see him again not as the main composer, but as the one who provides the Jewish motives on several occasions, when there's a Shabbat meal, when there's an uprising, until the last uprising in the ghetto. And it's absolutely worth watching. And maybe I can give you this as a kind of fade out for this lecture. Thank you for your patience, 40 minutes.
Well, but now there's pressure for it to be pressing, but I want to just return to some of the sort of cultural nuance questions that you asked at the beginning. Yeah. And just, we get to get more of you to kind of weigh in on this. That I was struck by the fact that Ruth and Moshe had spent time in the Palestine Opera. And if that was its own separate kind of aesthetic, cultural and nation building, how did that then translate to this idea of distinctly Yiddish opera style? I think this is one of the things that was interesting to hear from our David yesterday, this sense that it's not German, it's not Russian, it's not Hebrew, it's a Yiddish opera performance. But I'm just wondering, sort of aesthetically, technically, if there's any indication of how maybe those experiences in the Palestine opera informed this sense of a Yiddish, uniquely Yiddish opera.
Well, they went there 1 year after the performance in Warsaw. Warsaw was 1924, and they went to become cast members of the Palestine Opera in 1925. And again, they only stayed for 3 years. So when the entire undertaking faltered, they went to the US, right? And also, they went where the jobs were. It's pretty simple. So by then, they had 2 children. And so Ruth had her second child by then. She was pregnant in 1924, pretty much when she was singing already on stage. And then she had her child when they went to Palestine. So no, it was a question of employment. And maybe also curiosity to see what it's like. But you go where the money is.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I wish I had read your talk before I gave mine. I'd like to ask whether Yiddishness is a subset of Jewishness or deserves its own ness. I guess what I wanted to ask you is, a lot of this sort of takes place in the context of what's the Habsburg Empire. And there is already in the Habsburg Empire a kind of music with many dialects, whether it's Mozart and all the dialects or Mahler sort of going. And I wonder whether this Yiddish universalism that you're talking about is a product of the fact that it grew up within the Habsburg Empire with all these competing languages and religions, or whether you think it's apart from that.
I love that question. Thank you. So first of all, I think the main protagonists of the Yiddishland conceptualization came actually from Poland. So they were not necessarily part of the Habsburg Empire, but or at least partly. Let's put it like that, partly. But what I love about this, and you're spot on, because that is the big differentiation between the empire and the nation state. The nation state needs something very different for its self-understanding. It needs those hermetic categories to self-identify, whereas the empire is usually much more inclusive. The empire needs to be inclusive because it's simply vaster, it stretches further. It needs to be able to incorporate ethnicities, languages, ways of living that are not bound to one language, one, nation state defining cultural felt superiority ideal. So you're perfectly right in that the idea of empire and what the empire presented is in a way closer to the Yiddishland concept than the nation state. So thank you for that question. You're spot on.
So
get such a bullet point. Okay. All right, I'll keep it brief. Thank you so much for this really wonderful paper. I enjoy every aspect of it. I had one comment and one question. So the first question was whether you might have the reflection after having worked through all of this material on this oxymoron you raised about Yiddish secularism. And if you kind of landed one way or the other, whether there is such a thing, whether it is truly oxymoronic, what exactly they might have been trying to articulate with that sentiment. So that's my question. And then my comment is just that Joel Berkowitz at the University of Milwaukee is currently Ponki at Ravalina Bolpat. So I wanted to flag that for you so that you can be in touch with him. Thank you. So we can touch base with like his contact information.
Thank you so much. Now, to be honest, so for me personally, it is not an oxymoron. But I can also, I speak also, but I'm happy to discuss this, right? I mean, I can only say for me personally, but, that is open. Because for me, I can think of, language truly being a carrier of identity. So language and embracing the Yiddish language, even at that time, for most people was a conscious choice, as you know. I mean, there were so many choices, especially among the intelligentsia, right? I mean, and we know that there was this conscious language switch and language shift. So we had those starting, those writers starting in Hebrew or starting in Russian or starting in Polish and then switching to Yiddish. So that was consciously done. So, and then you were free to, within, the realm of secularism, to pretty much write everything you wanted, but the marker was the language. And for me, to a certain degree, it still is. So I can perform my own Jewishness via Yiddish as a marker also of my identity, without defining it or underlying it with any either religious or nationalistic or national, structures. Yeah. Anything, everything. I mean, it's really, everything is possible, right? I mean, you can imbue your Yiddish musical language gestures. You can imbue it with spirituality, and that was done at the time as well. But then, of course, you could draw on it as a kind of folksy experience, right? You could draw from it as a traditional, as a heritage experience, and that was totally fine. And Kon pretty much did all of that. Absolutely everything. So he played on the entire register, from nigunim to liturgical. If you watch Border Street, there have these beautiful liturgical moments. So yeah. So and I think they never thought of it as contradictory. Yeah, you're most welcome.
Thank you. It was really wonderful presentation. Just a lot of as you charity as a federator who expands their Yiddish opera and Jewish theater and Jewish music. And instead of something that has come up already, that subtle presentation is going to come up more, it's the idea that Jewishness can sometimes easily get through absence instead of presence. And in that spirit, I noticed a name that was missing from the lists that has come up of composers of Yiddish operettas, Jewish musical theater, and that is Joseph Muschitzky.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering, because so many of the ideals that you sought to body relate so much to the St. Petersburg conservators' notion of nationality, despite their active rejection of the Yiddish theater, and the fact that Muschitzky aspired to write an opera, had his opera reformed and was, and about a lot of these similar ideas of Jewish and Yiddishkeit in his music. I'm wondering if you know
Can I just interrupt you? I would strongly shy away from the term authenticity. Yeah. That is true, yes. Yeah. So thank you for that. So is this question more about where I would place Rumshinsky in the spectrum of these answers, or? To be honest, not that I know of. I think I would need to look out for that. I'm so sorry. I have not seen any reference by Kon. I don't know if there were yet. I'm sure he knew of him, for sure, in that world, but I'm so sorry.
Yeah, only I wonder if that's maybe one reason he had such trouble establishing himself, because he, in some ways, inhabited a similar aesthetic and cultural space that we should see already very significantly and commonly occupied here.
Yeah.
So it's
I need to check that. Thank you. Thank you. Very, very interesting thought. Okay. Thank you.